It's been a while. How's it going, everyone? My name is Matt and welcome back into the channel. This is our first video in almost 2 months and the first one of 2025, so Happy New Year, guys. Today I want to spend some time and talk about Supreme Darkness, the new core set being released in the TCG in about a week's time. And this set, it's not the most incredible set in the world. It doesn't have the best, most powerful cards or newest, craziest meta-defining archetypes, but it does have a slight impact on the format, and I do believe it's going to at least shake up a little bit of what we're seeing right now, thanks to the releases of Crossover Breaker back in December, paired with the new cards coming out in SUDA. So today we're going to go over my top 5 best meta decks for the post-Supreme Darkness competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. And just a bit of a spoiler alert for you guys, there are going to be a lot of really expensive decks on this list. Most of them really want to take advantage of all these really powerful and expensive cards in the format today, including these really good non-engine cards like Molcharmi Fuwalos, Perulia, and the newly released Molcharmi Meows. So if you're interested in hearing what my top 5 best budget decks are for this format, let me know by leaving a like on the video and commenting down below. But with that being said, let's go ahead and jump on into it. First things first is that when we look at the best decks of the format, they all have one thing in common, and that's that they can play a ton of non-engine cards to shut down the opponent's plays. Now, all these decks are incredibly powerful, have really high ceilings and are very consistent, but that consistency to also be able to find a lot of really good hand traps is very important to what their strategies try to do. Now, that's partly because the playstyle nowadays is less so wombo combo break my crazy end board and more of like a I'm going to create a really good advantage loop over the course of a game and be able to whittle down your resources over time. And that's what Yu-Gi-Oh has become over the past year or so. And these decks on this list you're going to see all kind of fit that description with the exception of I guess 1 or 2. And our first deck on this list fits that description to a T, and that's going to be pure Ryzeal. Ryzeal is the best deck released in Crossover Breakers. I think it's pretty clear that's the case right now over Maliss, and the deck is able to do a ton of really cool things. It's able to establish a really good rank 4 suite, including Ryzeal Detonator and Duo Drive to get you a ton of resources and constantly interrupt the opponent. And with the new Eclipse Twins coming out in Supreme Darkness as well, the deck gets even better. The issue with the deck though is going to be its consistency. You really only have 10 main deck Ryzeal monsters in 3 copies of Ext, Ice, Sword, and the 1 copy of Node as well. After that it's like Bonfire, Pot of Desires, and that's pretty much it. Some decks even decide to play Small World, and I don't think that's a really good choice at all. So if you can't find a copy of Ice, Ext, or Sword, you're going to be in for a really tough time. And even then, if those cards get interrupted by something like an Infinite Impermanence, if you don't have an extender, your deck kind of just stops working in a way. But if you do have that extender, you can get to that rank 4 and really start enabling all these powerful pushes that the deck has to offer. Now, while many people expected pure Ryzeal to be the best deck of the format immediately after Crossover Breaker's release, that wasn't really the case, and that's because it doesn't only have weaknesses in its consistency, it's also pretty weak to a few really common side deck cards, most notably something like Destructive Druma Karmic Cannon, and of course Dimensional Barrier. These 2 cards shut down that strategy because they can't get them to rank 4s. If Ryzeal can't get to their rank 4s in Duo Drive and Detonator, it becomes really hard for them to keep up in this format. Now, pure Ryzeal still happens to have those problems in this format, but it does get a little bit better thanks to the inclusion of Eclipse Twins, the new super rare being released in Supreme Darkness. This card is ridiculous. It's a custom card for Ryzeal with 3 amazing effects. Firstly, Eclipse Twins can use rank 4 monsters you control as material for a Succeed summon, which means you can take a spent copy of Duo Drive and be able to get this card on top of it as well, which will free you up from the Ryzeal crosslock that you would have. On top of that, you can detach a material and attack up to 2 times, which is really good to be able to close out games, which pure Ryzeal can have a hard time doing. And of course, the most important effect of all is if this card is sent to the graveyard in any way, that means detached from an Xyz material or sent off the effect of X Ryzeal, you can then target 2 other Xyz monsters, 2 other rank 4 Xyz monsters in your graveyard, special summon one of them, and attach the other to it as material, meaning you can constantly recycle resources over and over, including a copy of something like Ryzeal Detonator. Speaking of Ryzeal Detonator, that card is incredible, but if it gets hit with a copy of Infinite Impermanence as your opponent is starting their turn, you basically lose out on multiple forms of interruption. But not anymore thanks to Eclipse Twins. You can simply use the effect, pop the copy of Detonator, and Eclipse Twins will trigger, bring itself back, or bring back the Ryzeal Detonator rather, with another rank 4 underneath it, and then Ryzeal Detonator will trigger to attach another monster as well, giving you 2 extra interruptions. So that's a really good way to play around common forms of negation right now. And because the engine can play a ton of non-engine cards, it's easily able to mold itself into whatever the format kind of dictates you to become. Moving on to our number 4 best meta deck, we have Tenpai Fiendsmith. Now, Tenpai Fiendsmith is just proof that Tenpai will never die. Basically, what all these people did is they took all these banned Tenpai Dragon cards, took them out of the deck, and replaced them with these really powerful Fiendsmith cards, which are amazing at breaking boards on their own. And once they do break those boards, they're able to set up negation in the form of Fiendsmith Desiree. Once you go through all these Fiendsmith cards, you can then slap down a copy of Chundra, Pydra, Sangan Kaiman, or even something like Sangan Summoning, and right there you have a full OTK. The deck doesn't play a ton of synchro monsters anymore. It really plays your mainstays being your copies of Bident, Transcendent, and Trident Dragion, and after that is going to be your hodgepodge of really good generic cards for the strategy. You have the Link OTK line with Raging Phoenix and World Sea Dragon Zealantis, but you also have copies of your Fiendsmith monsters in the extra deck, and of course Hieratic Seal of Heavenly Spheres for a backup plan when you're going first. And if for whatever reason the deck can't OTK, you still have a ton of really powerful options because the Fiendsmith cards are just so sticky and able to recur their resources so effectively. And if you're made to go first, well that's totally fine, because Fiendsmith Desiree backed with a ton of hand traps is a great end board. The deck still has the same weaknesses like Kikinagashi Fucho and Dimensional Barrier, but Fucho isn't really around that much since Snake Eyes was just hidden to oblivion, and at the end of the day, D-Barrier is really strong, but it's not the end of the world because the deck is able to play fusions, links, and exceeds a lot more effectively. But its biggest issue in my opinion is going to be its consistency, because it's so hard to find one of these really good Tenpai Dragon cards in your list. But if you manage to find one of these really powerful blowout cards, pair with all your board breakers or hand traps, and of course a single copy of Fiendsmith Engraver or a copy of Lacrima for example, you're going to be in for a treat and you'll be able to easily OTK your opponents. Moving on to number 3, we have an incredible deck that has been around forever but has never been at the top of meta contention, and that's going to be Crystron. Now Crystron, like I said, has been around for a very long time, but with the new support coming in Supreme Darkness, the deck is taken to another level, and there are so many new cards that it's getting, and all of them are like crazy custom cards for the strategy. Specifically, Crystron Tristalos is ridiculous. Basically, when your opponent tries to do anything, they activate a card or effect, you can summon a Crystron from your deck and then immediately synchro summon with that card, and that allows you to make really powerful boss monsters and create one of the scariest endboards in the entire game today. They can easily summon out Crystron, Quarry, and Gandrax and banish at least 3 cards from your field or graveyard. On top of that, they have easy lines to Cyber Dragon Nova and Cyber Dragon Infinity by extension, because so many of their monsters are level 5 machines. And because they have a ton of level 5s and level 2 tuners, they're able to get to FA Dawn Dragster pretty consistently as well, meaning they're one of the few decks in the format today that is easily able to put up a ton of negation, which we haven't really seen on endboards that consistently since the banning of Baronne de Fleur and Borlo Savage Dragon. And while there are a ton of great combo starters and extenders in the strategy, the deck is also easily able to play like 18 or so non-engine cards too, and one of the best ones is Forbidden Droplet for the strategy, because not only is it a really powerful tool for negation, but it gets your cards into the graveyard where they can start your combos as well. Going first, the deck is essentially going to be an FTK because not many decks can play through it that effectively, and it just chews through hand traps like it's nothing. But that's where these Silver Bullet hand traps are going to come into play. Cards like Dimensional Barrier and Drone Lockbird and even Artifact Lancia to an extent are all really good against Crystron. Now while Lancia hurts a lot, the deck can still kind of play through it a little bit, but D-Barrier and Droll are almost going to be turn enders for this strategy, and I wouldn't be surprised if it came back in the format just to deal with this deck. In my opinion, Crystron has one of the highest ceilings of any deck in this format, and also has a pretty good floor as well. If you want to play competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, you 100% have to be prepared to play against Crystron. Moving on to our number 2 slot, we have Maliss Sky Striker. Now, I don't like the Sky Striker version of Maliss, but I can't deny that it is arguably the best way to play Maliss in this format. If you want to add cards like the Bistros, you absolutely can. I've even seen some people play the copies of your Kashtira cards, but I just don't think those ones are as good as the Sky Striker variant. The Striker cards are really good at breaking board, so when Maliss has to go second, it can effectively do that, but it's also able to draw them additional cards, which is really nice, and get them extra link material for them to be able to link off with and create their powerful end board. Speaking of which, when they go first, Maliss is absolutely ridiculous. There are so many ways to get to their combo. The only issue is it can be a little bit iffy if you start off with a copy of Maliss in Underground. If left uninterrupted, Maliss can create one of the scariest end boards in the game today. They of course have their trap cards, which are all really powerful. They have access to Terahertz as well, which is a really insane boss monster and can dump a copy of Desavorm to the graveyard to act as interruption, and of course is just an annoying monster on the field as well. The deck is able to follow up their plays really well. On top of that, once the cards are in the graveyard, they can be easily banished by pretty much any means necessary to be able to get them back onto the field and keep extending. And of course, your Heartscriptor, White Binder, and Red Ransom are all insanely powerful link monsters. The deck does have a couple of weaknesses, but the biggest one to me is easily going to be Artifact Lancia. Lancia just completely destroys this entire strategy, and almost everyone is siding copies of Artifact Lancia. And what we're seeing now as well is a lot of people siding a copy of Artifact Sanctum and Triple Tactic Thrust. So if you do get interrupted by anything, you can just set your Sanctum, use the Sanctum to summon out the copy of Lancia, tribute it, and there you go, your opponent can no longer banish cards. Maliss is a great deck, but I do think it has one other pretty notable weakness, and that's going to be that it loses games in time a lot more often than other strategies. Sure, they have ways to recycle back their life points with the trap card, but they also have ways to just inflict so much burn damage to themselves over the course of a long game. Every time they want to revive back a Maliss main deck monster, 300 life points. A Maliss extra deck monster, 900 life points. It really adds up consistently over the course of an entire duel. And you never know, with the way that duels are going right now, they can last pretty long. And if Maliss is going to be continually burning themselves, they can lose games in time that they otherwise would have won. But even with Maliss being able to set up one of the scariest end boards in the game and having a ton of room for non-engine, it is in my opinion nowhere near our #1 best meta deck. It is a chasm between Maliss and our #1 spot. But before we get there, here's a few decks I want to shout out. Number 1, I am absolutely loving White Forest. I think it's a great deck, it is so much fun to play, and the new support makes it that much better. If you guys want to see a White Forest combo guide or deck profile, I will be posting that shortly as well. I also want to give a shout out to Memento as a deck as well. The deck is very solid, does a lot of really good things, and the fact that Dimension Shifter is not really in the format right now means it's going to see a lot of popularity. Both these decks, White Forest and Memento, are great choices, but they're not going to be good enough to reach that top 5 status in my opinion. And part of the reason why is that they don't always play copies of the Fiendsmith cards or the Ryzeal cards or even the Maliss cards. Without those cards, it becomes really difficult to make a really strong strategy. But moving on to our #1 best meta deck, we have a tie between Ryzeal Fiendsmith and Ryzeal Mitsurugi. These two decks are ridiculously good, and they play very different playstyles. I'll start with Ryzeal Fiendsmith because it's the deck that we've known for the better part of the past format. But Ryzeal Fiendsmith is ridiculous. Who would have thought? You add in the Fiendsmith cards and the Ryzeal cards and you get one of the best decks in the format. These two engines pair together so incredibly well. Ryzeal normally has an issue with consistency, but if you open up with a single copy of a Fiendsmith card and 4 hand traps, you can end on Desiree or Caesar with 4 other interruptions in hands, which is still very good and can get you time until you draw into your Ryzeal cards. And if you start off with your Ryzeal monsters, you can easily get into your copy of your Fiendsmith cards as well, thanks to Moon of the Closed Heaven or Evilswarm Exciton Knight being able to be easily linked off into a copy of Fiendsmith Requiem. The deck is incredibly powerful and is a very mid-range type deck in my opinion. It's a really good deck that's going to be performing all over the place in this upcoming format, and if you're not ready to play against it, you're going to have a really tough time. But the reason why the deck has kind of been created is because Ryzeal normally loses to a copy of Dimensional Barrier. If you get debarriered, that's fine. You just go full Fiendsmith combo and back it up with your hand traps, survive the next turn, and then use your Ryzeal and Fiendsmith cards to break boards. But that brings me to the new version of this deck being Ryzeal Mitsurugi, which is a combination of the TCG exclusive archetype Mitsurugi, which is a ritual strategy, and of course, Ryzeal. Now the reason why these two strategies work well together is because the main deck non-ritual monsters for Mitsurugi are level 4s. So that gives you half of a rank 4 monster for duo drive, which allows you to then be able to search for any of your Ryzeal cards. But on the other hand, if you start off with your Ryzeal cards, they're also level 4s and you can overlay into King of the Feral Imps, which is going to allow you to search for any of your Mitsurugi cards. On top of that, Eclipse Twins can allow you to recycle your copy of King of the Feral Imps to get additional searches because it's not a hard once per turn. And then you have of course the big bad boss monster for the Mitsurugi archetype being Murakumo Mitsurugi. This card is ridiculous. It's so easy to get out because all of your Ryzeal cards get you to your Mitsurugi cards, which can then easily summon it out with either the quick play spell or of course the ritual spell, which is basically going to be branded fusion for ritual monsters, which is crazy strong. When this card is special summoned, it's just Raigeki. That's awesome. On a 3200 attack, body is great, When your opponent activates a card or effect, they have to discard a card or it's negated, which is great so they can hand loop the opponent as well. And of course, when it's tributed, it summons itself back out and searches for a Mitsurugi card. Really insane card in this format. It's able to constantly recycle itself back. It's just able to put on so much pressure. And the Ryzeal deck, it already puts on a lot of pressure as well. When you add that to the Mitsurugi combo as well, you just end up with an insane deck in this format that a lot of strategies are going to have a hard time keeping up with. Now, if I had to choose between Ryzeal Fiendsmith and Ryzeal Mitsurugi, I would say that right now, Ryzeal Fiendsmith is slightly ahead, but not by much, and I think depending on any innovations we see with the Mitsurugi cards, this deck can easily become the best deck of the format. But there you have it, that's my top 5 best meta decks for the post-Supreme Darkness competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. If you liked the video, do me a favor and leave a like on the video, it would be greatly appreciated, and comment down below your thoughts on the upcoming format and what deck you're going to be playing. Personally, I will be rocking with White Forest. I'm loving that deck right now, and I have all the cards. I don't have to spend $300, $400, $500 on the copies of the Ryzeals, Fiendsmith, all that stuff, so it is what it is. I want to thank you as well for sticking around the channel for the past month to 2 months that I've been away for. Life has just kicked me in the ass a few times, and I wanted to thank you guys for that, so I really do appreciate it. This is a great outlet for me to be able to do what I want to do and have a great hobby, and I'm really appreciative that I have even one person watching a video of mine, so thank you all so much for that. And of course, thank you for watching this video. Leave suggestions for what you want to see me do next, and I will try my best to bring them to you. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.